Good evening, everyone. And here we are with another Meet the Musicians in Your Neighborhood episode. And before we started, I was calculating the number of guests we've had in the last about 8 or 9 weeks. And I think Richard will be our 19th guest. And it's been wonderful to reconnect and connect with all the musicians in our neighborhood, in Saskatoon and elsewhere as well. And tonight's special guest is no exception. We have SSO's principal bass player, Richard Carnegie. Richard, how are you doing?
I'm great, Eric. It's good to see you.
Yeah, nice to see you. First of all, how has life been for you in terms of teaching, in terms of music making over the last number of weeks?
Like we were talking earlier today, when Eric and I were just chatting, we were kind of saying this has been quite a learning curve for me, who doesn't really embrace technology. I like to tell my students I really embrace 17th century technology. Suddenly have to get kind of up to speed on this. The good thing is all my students are. So like at the beginning, I think my Zoom and FaceTime lessons were probably a little bit frustrating from the student end because they were mostly teaching me how to use all this kind of stuff. But it's been good, and I think especially as a teacher, I've learned a lot about different ways to approach something, because you can really tell what isn't working when you don't have the luxury of so many things like picking up the student's instrument, making all the kinds of adjustments that we do in in-person teaching. So I think, I've learned a lot about how I teach. Even though I think we would all, like anyone who teaches right now is probably going to say they would prefer the in-person teaching.
Sure.
But I think that there's a takeaway from it at the same time.
Well, there's learning curves going on all around us. Like you mentioned technology, but I like that you mentioned how you teach, because those of us who have or do, like you presently, there's certain students or certain situations that push us to in ways that we didn't know and improve us as teachers.
Well, I found that also just simple things that is something I've noticed a lot. I'll do in my teaching. I'll say like, oh, let's go from the restatement of the theme, and I'll point at that in the music. And when you can't do that, you start to realize how many things that you're not fully explaining, or you get a chance to see it from the student's perspective.
Right.
Do a lot of filling in our mind of like what, and I know that my own teachers did this too, because they would often they could tell that I wasn't always grasping what was going on. So they like, repeat that back to me, or can you show me what this is? And I it's kind of gotten me out of the loop of constantly showing students things.
Right.
And I think that's, I talk to this with my students all the time, that they have to take ownership of their own learning. And I think this is helping me kind of let go of some of the micromanaging that maybe I do,
Right.
in teaching, allowing them to take more ownership of their own learning.
Right. And it might, like you say, it might take a little bit longer, but with them having to learn, for instance, where the theme is, that first theme or the recap or whatever it is, even those words, they're going to hear them more often. They're going to go, hold on, he said that before, and I don't know where that is, so I'm going to have to figure it out. And we automatically start to learn more and more that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, Richard, for those of the audience who don't know where you're from or how long you've been here, where are you from? How long you've been in Saskatoon, and how long have you been with the symphony?
I am originally from Burlington, Ontario.
Okay.
Moved around a bunch, and I found myself in Saskatoon. I think it's been 13 or 14 years now
Okay.
that I've been here, and I moved to join with the symphony, and I've been here ever since.
And you not only play principal bass in the symphony, which is wonderful, but you also are the music director and conductor of the Saskatoon Youth Orchestra.
That's been I think, as much as I love playing in the symphony, that's been the real highlight of my time in
Sure.
Saskatoon. I've been directing the youth orchestra here for the last 11 years, and that's been one of my great joys. And I would have to say, musically, what I miss most
Okay.
during COVID, because all of our musical plans are kind of thrown up in the air, but that's what I've missed the most.
And what is it about working with youth and well, their energy, but what really excites you about the youth orchestra?
Community, and how that in conjunction with the music and enthusiasm, I mean, for myself, youth orchestras is when I really fell in love with music making, and I think part of that
Mm.
also came with just making friends. Um, I've talked with board members and alumni over the years, and some people say, oh, does it bother you that some people are just the enticement to come to youth orchestra is to be with your friends? I'm like, no, that should be the number one enticement. Like, that's the reason to do it. And I think from there, a lot of music making opportunities happen. But it's the first time you get to play some of these major works. Like something I was really excited about this year is we were in the midst of preparing to perform Dvorak New World Symphony, which
Mm.
was the first full symphony I ever played in youth orchestra. So it was a really neat moment, watching players kind of learn and get really dive into this music for the first time. And I wish we would have gotten to
Yeah.
perform it, obviously, but it really brought me back to that time where the idea. I remember the first time I did a full symphony with a youth orchestra, because you know this experience as well. When you're younger, you do little movements of stuff, but the
Hmm.
first time these real big pieces, and you're so looking forward to it. And I think there's just that enthusiasm about diving into it, and I like being able to vicariously re-experiencing that, by working with young players.
It's a special time when we're kids and we're in the youth orchestra, and we have, like you said, we're seeing our friends. So there's a fun part of it. Saturday mornings or whenever it is, Sunday evenings here, whenever it is in your city, and you're
Mm.
getting together, not with your school friends, but something different with
Yeah.
your orchestra friends. You're having a lot of fun, and then, like you say, experiencing these masterworks for the first time. And I was
Mm.
the last 3 weeks we've had different conductors on. We've been talking about Beethoven symphonies, and one time I related the story of running through Beethoven's seventh for the first time when I was a kid, and it's stunning, it's shocking, it's
Mm.
fun, and it's mind-boggling all at the same time. And like you say, to feel the energy when we conduct kids or youth orchestras, and to have, hopefully they're not jaded yet, to have that
Yeah.
experience come through, it's special.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah.
Oh, Megan Greer has a question. What's the difference in how you approach a piece when you are playing versus when you are conducting? Great question.
Oh, I think, um, the more you conduct, the more you start preparing for orchestra in the way that you would conduct. You can get, I mean, everyone knows this, but when you look at your part in orchestra, you literally only have your part in front of you, unless you go and look at the score. And it's just logistics. It would be impractical for your part to have all the other parts
Right.
there. But the more I conduct, the more I'm trying to listen and think holistically about the piece. And I think that it's easy to fall into the trap of not thinking that way in orchestra. As much as you are listening to what's going on around you, you can really get caught up in the part being just your part, and how it doesn't link to the others. So I guess I would say, when I'm doing things right, I'm hoping I'm blurring that line a bit more. But yeah, I think in an ideal world, they wouldn't look that different in terms of preparation.
Right, right. And although, I mean, as principal bass, there's added or different responsibilities that you have. For instance,
Mm-hmm.
you're constantly thinking about the section, listening to a section, articulation, seeing that your whole section is there. Also with the cello, because often you play the similar things, or with other sections, whatever it is. So there's that constant, as a player, you're playing, but also connecting with your fellow bass players. And conducting, sure, you have all of those instruments, but it's in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think something I find with conducting in the actual moment is I try and sometimes figure out to what extent I'm just getting in the way.
Mm.
For a number, we've had a number of times where we've had actually, it was a youth orchestra player that came up with this idea. We were going to have one of the SYO players get to conduct the orchestra, and I said, we're going to do this conducting class for this person who gets to do it. And they said, well, why don't you open it to everyone? So we've done this a couple times. We have every week for a month after rehearsal, we have this class on score analysis, all the things that basically go into conducting. And whoever gets chosen to conduct the orchestra, one of the first things I have them do is go through the piece, conduct it, and then say, okay, start them, and then put your hands down and just do nothing and let the musicians play. And a lot of times, and I've noticed this, it's one of those things where, when you're teaching something, you're also trying to remind yourself. Like when I tell my students, like, practice slowly, do this, do that, and then I step in the practice room the next day and I think, oh my goodness, I'm
Right.
breaking all the rules that I set down for my students to do. But I think they're really amazed to see how much can happen with the conductor staying out of the way. So sometimes when I'm up there, I'm just trying to think about, okay, we've put in the process and rehearsal, time to step back and just let the music happen a bit.
Yeah, that's a great part, but it's also one of the hardest things as conductors is to get out of the way or know when to get out of the way, and that's I think something that will I don't know, I can't speak for you, but for me, go on for my whole life of
Oh, yeah.
of like, oh shoot, okay, that was that wasn't great, or this, and but it's a wonderful example of as conductors we literally make no sound without those people, and that's a very humbling and good thing for us to remember all the time.
Well, I remember when I was doing my undergrad, we had this guest conductor come often. His name was Zednik Mikal. He was the conductor of New Jersey Symphony, and he's Czech. And I, I say this with huge admiration for people who learn a second language, and understanding that it's a challenge to work in your second language. He wasn't always completely comprehensible in his English. And I remember talking to some students in the school who were Czech, and they're like, "Oh yeah, he makes just as little sense in Czech." But he had this way about gesture, like he could give a mezzo forte with his eyes. He could give everything was so crystal clear through his gestures, and it's always interesting to think about what is it, because it's almost like an alchemical kind of process that you're able to. I mean, it's an elusive thing, kind of trying to chase after that. But he was able to say so much without saying it in words, and I always appreciated that.
That's great. That's great. We've got now the questions are coming fast and furious. Karen Moff wants to know: do you have any good stories about bow rehearing?
Oh goodness. No, not necessarily. Just the time that I lost my bow, and so I thought I would not just be getting a rehair, but buying a whole new bow. It was I left my bow on the GO train. It was, I'd been saving up, finally got my first good bow.
Right.
I was taking the train back and forth because I went to this awesome high school in Toronto. It was a publicly funded arts high school, but I lived out in the suburbs and I was taking the train each way. And so about a week into owning my first nice bow, I left it on the train. So
Boy.
yeah, but thankfully, no, I wish I had some fascinating bow rehair stories, Karen. But
I thought Karen, maybe you had told us one at some point. I'm not even sure about Ludi or something. I don't even know. But
oh yeah. There's this guy in Toronto that I've been going to for ages. He's just he's got this wonderful attention to detail about everything. I'm kind of just I'm a devotee of his repairs.
Nice. Allison Miller has a great question. Would you consider a collaboration between double bass and piccolo, potentially with the SSO principal flute player, Allison Miller?
Totally. You know what I really want to play that has piccolo in it, and I will say that I've been requesting this for the last 13 years, which is the Schulhoff Concertino.
Oh.
For viola, bass, and flute, doubling piccolo. Phenomenal piece of music.
Okay.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Definitely yes.
Keep that in mind. Sage is here. Hi, Sage. You had some stellar costumes on stage over the years. You played in the orchestra as Darth Vader. Have you ever conducted using a lightsaber?
I have. First time youth orchestra did Star Wars. We actually there's whatever the people are really into, like, creating medieval battle scenes. The Society for Creative Anachronism. Whatever the Star Wars equivalent of that is, there's a troupe like that's in town. So we got in contact with them, and so we had people that like came fully in costume. At the end, the last chord, we had this guy who was dressed up very convincingly as Obi-Wan Kenobi run down the stairs and give me the lightsaber to conduct the final thing. But yeah, I've had some pretty ridiculous costumes over the years for like concerts that warrant costumes. It's not like I show up to play a Tchaikovsky symphony dressed up as one
Well,
of those things.
you could. Well, no, actually, you can't.
Yeah, you be careful, Eric. I wouldn't go
According to
there. But
the dress code conduct, but your costumes with the pops are stellar. That's for sure. We've got some great comments from Richard Jansen, for instance. Much credit to Richard for
hi,
inspiring
Richard.
the youth orchestra and to be such a great ambassador to youth music in the province. Miss our collaborations, he says.
Richard is director of choirs at Rosin Junior College, which, of course, Eric, you know well because
I
you're
I
a alum
do.
there. And
And
for years, the youth orchestra would go up and we'd start our year off with a retreat at RJC, at the Rosin Junior College, and collaborate with Richard's choirs. And yeah, it's always been a really fond memory of this.
and at one point you posted my grade 12 graduation picture that you found
Oh
on the
yeah,
wall.
yeah. So there's a really great photo of you, Eric. I wish oh man, if I wish I had that on my phone. I could bring that
I
up.
have it upstairs, but I'm not. It's not coming
It's
out.
gold. It's gold. Anyone, if you're in the we're not really supposed to be traveling right now, but when you can, get down to RJC and check out this picture of Eric. Eric, it's wonderful.
It's fun. It's an 17-year-old picture. Or sorry,
Yeah.
I am 17 at the time.
I can see you're like, okay, next topic. We're gonna go on right now. So I'm next topic. Eric.
Okay, great. Ella says, does your experience of playing in the YouTube orchestra, that's right, I forgot about that, help you with staying active as a musician in the COVID-19 Zoom era?
I'm really not great with technology.
Mhm.
I'm not great yet at it. I'm working on it. So what was it? 2011. YouTube put on this contest where you could put up an audition, and if they liked your audition, you got invited to perform in an orchestra at the Sydney Opera House in February. And so I was like, February, free trip to Australia, escape the winter. That was like the best practice motivator. That, and I was just like, okay, if I'm going to put up a video of myself on YouTube, I want it to sound good. And so I threw up a video and I got to go, and that was amazing. And I haven't put up a lot on YouTube since until COVID hit. And I'm trying to record things more at home because that's what people are doing right now. And I think before I was thinking, oh, well, I need to go get concert hall and all these fancy mics. But, it's just been my home studio,
Mm-hmm.
put my phone on a stand and go and record some things. And I've had an opportunity to record it. I think about one thing a week or so since this hit, and wanting to share it with, especially with the SSO audience. So I'm hoping to do more of that. But this is really kind of thrown into relief for me how much I'm not tech savvy, but would like to be.
Well, the amount of content that you've been posting with the SSO has been wonderful, and duets and different things. And I just put up the little ticker tape underneath to give a plug to your YouTube channel, which is great. How many videos are there already? Something like 12 or 13.
Yeah,
It's
right.
and all different styles and different things. So check that out with Richard's YouTube channel for sure. Cindy says, there's a great jazz rendition of the Battle of Jericho, a duel for bass and drums. Are you familiar with it? Would you tackle something like this? And what genres do you perform?
I'm not familiar with it.
Okay.
I would, in theory. See, here's the thing: is I love jazz. It's not something I've invested a lot of time in myself. One of my biggest hesitations musically is to turn into the jack of all trades, expert at none, and the amount of time that I would need to put into jazz to really, because it's a different language. Really.
It is. It is.
Become conversant in jazz is not something. I want time for hobbies that aren't music. I've a number of my students have become very interested in jazz and have quickly become much better jazz players than I am. They focus that time on developing the language of jazz.
Well,
And
and that's what it is, isn't it? It's focusing. It's learning that language. It's different, and there's so many nuances and different things to the genre.
Yeah. So it's not that it's not from a lack of interest in jazz, but I think, between focusing on my playing, my teaching, and conducting with the youth orchestra, there just sometimes isn't, there's time left in the day, but I want time to go have a bike ride and these kind of things. So I get really shy when I have to do jazz. because I feel like intense imposter syndrome coming on, because it's like I know how to play the instrument, but I know that I speak it like a second language, and that's fine. But there are people who speak it fluently, and I really admire those who do.
I think most classical musicians feel that way. Whatever it is, whatever instrument it is. I know, of course, bass and piano and guitar are some of the more, or trumpet. Those are the regular jazz instruments. But I think we all, if we're playing a chart or in the studio to back someone up, it's we all feel a bit that way. Like, ooh, am I doing this right? Oh, am I not swinging well? Or
And that feels like one of my like I try not to live with regrets, because you can only live your life forward. But something I do tell my students is that I wish that I'd found a way to reconcile the focus that I wanted to put on classical playing while also learning more about other genres of music. And again, it's not too late to do so.
no,
It's just not where I budget my time. But I do encourage my students to
that's
um,
great.
get as much experience in as many genres as possible, because it's only going to make you a more
Exactly,
well.
exactly. To even if you never use it, it will make you a better musician. Yeah,
Oh,
I'm sure of that. Yeah. Kimball wants to know what other instruments do you play for fun? Can we see?
piano, poorly. Um,
Okay.
this is another thing that I've had to adjust to with my teaching. I'm okay at it as a piano, but I definitely spend a lot of time accompanying my students uh, at the piano during lessons, and that has had to change during COVID, because you can't do that in
Right.
real time. I really think it's great for students to hear the chord that they're fitting into. So adjusting to that. That being said, I tell my students, like, there's a certain number of pieces that I can play, and I try and learn one piece of standard repertoire that takes more practicing on the piano. I kind of try and add one each year or so. But there are certain pieces that I tell those students, I'm like, okay, I can maybe hack through this in a lesson, but do not make me play this in public,
Right.
because it's not going to go well. So yeah, piano, and I like to goof around on the cello, but no one wants to
Oh,
do that in public.
do you own a cello?
No, no, but occasionally get my hands on one. But yeah, no, it's basically just the piano and bass. And piano
Okay.
is great, of course. I mean, we all know this. It's wonderful to be able to hear music in multiple parts. It's really, in so many ways, a complete instrument. I'm glad that I wish I had more time to keep it up. But again, the jack of all trades, expert at none. I'm definitely not an expert at the
Well,
piano.
no,
I
you
can
are
attest to that. I can attest to that.
expert. That's for sure. In at least one.
No, not
But
piano. I'll tell you that much.
well, and you're right. Piano, guitar, with the instruments that provide the full harmony,
Hmm.
and you can do so much with them. I think for those of us whose main instrument is a single line instrument. I mean, of course, we can do double stops and we can do other things, but there's something special about piano and
Oh,
guitar and those
very much.
multi harmonic instruments for sure. Skip's here. Hi, Skip. French or German bow?
I am a French bow player. I was very lucky to spend time studying with the great double bass player Joel Corrington, who is a German bow player. And I studied German bow with him my year of study with him. I ultimately, um, I think that it's again a kind of a fluency thing. I speak French bow more like a first language.
Okay.
Um, I learned a lot from studying German bow, but I gravitated back to playing with French bow. So for those who are not from the French bow is the overhand grip, which is all the other string instruments, and the German bow is it's a different shape. It has a larger frog that holds the
Hmm.
hair and attaches it to the stick, and so it's held underhand.
And speaking about different ways of playing the bass, I
Mm,
know that you're very interested. You mentioned Joel, who plays in
yeah.
fifths.
Hmm.
And can you talk about that and maybe explain to people the different setups with the fourths and the fifths?
Sure, yeah. So the standard way of playing the bass is tuned in fourths. That's from the bottom E to A, and it's called a fourth because literally, if you go E, F, G, A, that's a fourth. So E, A, D, G. So tuning the bass in fifths, one of the big advantages is that you can get the low C, because you go C, G, D, A. You can get that note on a bass tune in fourths. You can either have a fifth string at the bottom of the bass, or you can have an extension that extends the length of the string beyond the end of the scroll. But there's a whole bunch of other advantages that come to tuning the bass in fifths. You're tuned one octave lower than the cello. All the other string instruments are tuned in fifths, so you can kind of explore it. I don't know. There's a resonance to playing the bass in fifths because the fifth occurs earlier in the harmonic series than the fourth does. I'm not very good at science though, so I'm not going to try and say anything more than that on it, or I'm going to start embarrassing myself.
I think that's great. But you mentioned the word explore because you get to explore because the cello and viola are in fifths. Well, of course, the violin is as well. But you can explore their repertoire a lot. The cello, Bach suites, or anything for that matter, just simply picking it up and reading it and playing it.
Exactly. And so when I started with the Saskatoon Symphony, I was playing in fifths from this year studying with Joel Corrington. I reverted back to fourths, and I just suddenly kind of got interested in exploring it again recently. And then COVID hit, and I've got plenty of time to explore. So it's interesting because I'm playing in fifths these days, but still, actually, most of the stuff I've recorded so far for the SSO on my YouTube channel is in fourths, although the last thing has been in fifths.
Okay.
And I'm teaching in fourths, so it's kind of neat to be like stuck between both tuning systems.
Keeps you on your toes.
Oh yeah, totally.
And
I have something to fill the hours.
talking about exploring repertoire, Karen wants to know favorite piece written specifically for the bass. Do you have one?
I'm going to be I'm in the midst of relearning it again. It's called Failing by Tom Johnson, and it's part of this kind of niche repertoire of double bass music where you narrate and play at the same time.
Yes.
And the premise of the piece is that it's called Failing, and the premise is that it's so difficult to play the piece and to narrate at some point at the same time that at some point you will fail. And the point of the piece is failing. So if you fail to fail by doing it really well, that will be a type of failure in and of itself. And this is the kind of text that's going on while you're flying around the bass trying to play it. I remember being really enamored with this piece, and I told my teacher, I'm like, I really want to do this on my recital. And it was Joel Corrington, who said, Richard, we need to concentrate on music with a pedagogical point to it. He said, once you win a job, then you can go and play all that ridiculous stuff as much as you want. But that's what I'm in the midst of relearning it right now because it doesn't really stay under the fingers. So that'll be the next thing.
Okay. And I've heard you play that piece, right?
Yeah.
It's a fantastic piece, and you do it so well.
It's a real party piece. And there's a whole bunch of pieces that you narrate while you play, and I'm quite fond of those. They make for interesting repertoire.
They're wonderful. Yeah. Sage wants to know, how much do bass strings cost? Good question.
Oh, way too freaking much. just the low. So the not fun thing about tuning in fifths again is that the low string itself is like over $100 just for the low C string. I went through a stage where I was really trying to try out as many different brands of strings as possible, and I figured all I was doing was just whoever is making the most money at these string companies. I was just putting their kids through college with the amount of money that I was sinking into it. So, of course, you can spend a lot of time tweaking things on your instrument, and then you just realize I just need to practice more. That's what's going to make it sound better, not.
That's one of our, as musicians, we do that, don't we? We go through these phases of every little detail. I remember talking about bass stuff, using Pabst Rosin. Is it Pabst? What's it called?
Pabst Rosin.
Yeah, bass rosin. Really, really sticky, heavy stuff on my viola bow for a long time because I thought it was the best stuff to get the best sound. And I think I went a bit overboard. But you're right. You could tweak and tweak and tweak. Then it's like, well, just go practice and get better that way.
Yeah, totally.
Oh, wow. There's so many great questions. Let's go with Emmett. Wants to know, what are some notable moments as a conductor of the SYO?
Oh, man. I'll never forget the first concert that I did with the SYO. We did Beethoven Fifth Symphony, as well as Nutcracker Suite. and the prelude to Act 3 of Lohengrin by Wagner. And I was just so excited. I was so excited backstage. I almost ran, like, because the conductor waits backstage while all the while everyone tunes up. And of course, I'm so used to being ready for the concert after the basses finish taking the A, but the upper strings still have to take their A. So I almost like charged out on stage because I was just like, oh, let's go. I'm so excited. And yeah, no, I mean, it wasn't my first time conducting, but I was just so excited to get out there.
Right. And where was that? Where did that happen?
That was at, I forget the name of I think it's Castle Theatre in Aden-Bowman. We've since moved to the university. We have an amazing partnership with the Department of Music there. And
Great.
So we do all our rehearsing there now. So that one will always stick in my mind. And then just various little like snippets of funny things. Times when we had an informal concert once where the bass section was constantly like they would player here and player here would like switch basses in the midst of the performance, just because just because this was at our retreat performance.
Oh, okay.
And I think they were doing it just to check that I'm actually watching what's going on. I didn't realize they were doing that, so that made me think, I need to look up more often. So, man, if I could talk till the cows come home of memorable performances with the youth orchestra. But the other one that really just sticks out in my mind was Liszt Les Préludes. I think especially because the learning curve on that, like it was a lot for all of us, and there was just such a feeling of accomplishment, flip end of it, and I was just I couldn't go to sleep that night. I was so excited about it.
Nice. There's nothing like a good challenge. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
Megan wants to know where does the love of trivia come from? Do you do trivia outside of hosting the SSO After Dark?
Yes. Yeah. Friends and I, we started going to pub trivia, and we actually have our pub trivia team name. We are the Secular Exorcists. So we were doing pub trivia at the Rook and Raven, so the reason behind our team trivia name was apparently at the time, this is probably like almost 10 years ago or something, there was a shortage of exorcists in Saskatchewan. Within the Roman Catholic Church, and this is around the time that Stephanie Unbricht, our principal of soon, had just joined the orchestra. You know what? When you first moved to, she's from here originally, but she was moving back, and you first start with the orchestra. You're trying to get your teaching established and all this other stuff. And Steph said like, I'd like to find like some sort of job. And someone said, well, there's a shortage of exorcists right now, and she said, I'm Lutheran. I can't become. So then we became the Secular Exorcists, and we've been that way ever since. So
nice.
We hosted we hosted trivia for the SSO on Zoom a couple nights ago, and that was super fun. So.
Which was fantastic. It was great questions. You and Steph did a brilliant job. It was a lot of fun. Yeah. And Steph, this is good. So it's about just after 7:30. So we'll be wrapping things up, and it kind of ties into, we talked a bit earlier, if you have maybe a music joke or something. But Steph wants to know, do you have any cool trivia facts about the bass or yourself?
Oh, I started playing the bass just to piss off my parents.
Oh, great.
Yeah. And I love my parents dearly. Like this wasn't, I was just kind of feeling mischievous. I'd sort of always been attracted to instruments that were like a little bit, I wanted them to have some pizzazz. So I started playing percussion at first, and then I discovered that my rhythm wasn't great. So I was like, okay, I got to get out of this racket. And then I took up the baritone saxophone, although I wasn't, the bell rested on the floor, and I wasn't really tall enough to play it yet. So I was like crooking my neck like this. I don't know why my band teacher allowed me to play it. Like, that should be kind of the thing where you're like, no, you can't play that instrument. You're not the right height to play it. And then I got into playing the bass. But I mostly just played it to annoy my parents, because I called them up and I said, because I rode my bike to school each day. I said, I need a ride home with this instrument. And they said, no, ride your bike. Just like put it on your backpack. And I said, well, I picked the double bass, and they didn't know what that was. But did they know what that was?
So it worked. It worked.
Oh yeah, it did.
Oh, that's good. It was a good choice in the long run.
Yeah.
Before we wrap it up, do you still love eating hummus? Sage wants to know.
Oh yeah. There was so back in the beginning of Facebook. I can't fully tell the story because I need to keep the language under wraps. But there was this thing that you could have these groups on Facebook. So I had this group called I freaking love eating hummus, but it was a less polite word.
Right.
And you could have officers in these groups, so that, like the president, the vice president, and stuff. But you could have them really silly things as well. So it kind of became this like weird hit in the Canadian orchestral community. So and they were all the officer positions were based on ingredients in hummus. So there was like officer chickpea, officer,
oil, garlic.
Yeah, well, there was officer apple cider vinegar as a substitute for lemon juice. I was known as the big tahini. So there was this one time I was visiting a friend of mine, Jeff White, who's actually used to be principal bass here in Saskatoon before I was Jeff. Yeah, I think he was playing in the Calgary Philharmonic at the time, and I went to a concert there, and I went out with a bunch of the musicians afterwards. And you know how after a concert, everyone from the orchestra, they're kind of talking shop, talking the concert. So I was introducing people, like, hey, it's nice to meet you, but kind of everything went back to just normal conversation thing. And then anyways, someone brought up this hummus group because a number of them were members of it. And I said, oh, actually, I'm the big tahini. And then suddenly there was this uproar. This guy's the big tahini. And, yeah. But anyways, yes, I still love eating hummus.
Good.
I'm probably eating some tomorrow.
You're still the big tahini.
I will always be the big tahini.
Good.
Yeah.
Before we wrap it up, do you have a musical joke that you'd like to share?
Told me to think of one. I got nothing. I'm dry.
Okay.
And I would like to think that if you'd like ask some members of the youth orchestra, that they would think that I'm funny. Although I'm not sure, because I one of my students, Rhett Schroeder, the former student of mine, he's now in the Saskatoon Symphony. Mm-hmm. He was sort of always the guy who would laugh at my jokes that I would tell in youth orchestra. And I remember telling Rhett, I was like, when you go, like, I'm really worried because like the only thing standing between me and awkward silence after I say things was him laughing. So I kind of put it out there that like someone had to take up his mantle.
Good. Well, I mean, awkward jokes in front of youth orchestras are a thing. So I mean, you're following a great tradition.
Oh, totally. I'd like to think that I'm funny, but I might not be. And so just to keep it like maybe he is funny, I'm just not going to tell any joke, and you can just assume that whatever I was going to say was hilarious.
Keep it a mystery. It was so funny, Richard. It was so funny.
Thanks. I do my best.
Before we go, I want to say a huge thanks to the Saskatchewan Orchestral Association for supporting all this content that we've done over the last number of weeks. And Richard, to you, to being here, and to our whole audience who always asks great questions. It's really nice catching up with you, Richard. Can't wait to do it in person. That'll be a lot of fun. We'll eat some hummus. We'll play some Tetris.
Totally.
And we'll have a good time.
Awesome. It's good to see you, Eric.
All right, you too. Take care.
Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.